itutuloy ko kung ano yung sinimula ni Pangulo.
Of course, we are very, very grateful and are happy to receive this much awaited and much hoped for news. Consolidate the forces of unity.
PDP Laban Vice President for the Visayas, Eastern Samar Governor Ben Evardone did not sign the resolution. He earlier expressed support for Marcos' rival Vice President Leni Robredo, believing Mr. Duterte virtually endorsed her when he said he wanted a compassionate and decisive lawyer as successor. For the ruling party's rival faction, the Kusi Wing's action only shows it's not the legitimate PDP Laban, noting that the party was formed in the 1980s, fighting the Marcos dictatorship.
So how a PDP Laban, which has merged during the time of President Cory Aquino, can now support the candidacy of their founding fathers' nemesis is beyond any principled choice.
We are moving forward kasi pagka lagi yung the past ang aming inisip at we live by the past, paano mo lang mangyayari sa atin?
Its founding fathers established the party to oppose then-President Ferdinand Marcos. Decades later, PDP Laban, at least for one of its factions, now finds itself supporting the dictator's son. Amor Santos, CNN Philippines.
Meanwhile, Senator Manny Pacquiao says the endorsement of Bongbong Marcos by Kusi's faction is, in his words, a slap on the face. Pacquiao urges members of the ruling party to ignore Kusi's endorsement. The presidential candidate leads the other faction of PDP Laban, along with Senator Coco Pimentel, son and namesake of the party's founder, the late former Senator Aquilino Pimentel Jr. There's a pending petition before the Commission on Elections to declare Pacquiao and his allies as illegitimate members of the ruling party.
Ay, baka nakalimutan ni Kusi na ang PDP, nabuo yung PDP against sa Marcos regime. Baka nakalimutan lang niya at lahat ng mga membro ng PDP, wag po nating sundin si Kusi. Sa akin lang, yung PDP Laban na yan, nabuo yan para sa against Marcos, tapos sa sasapi kay Marcos. Ano yan, parang isang sampal sa mga membro ng PDP.
Pacquiao visited Muntinlupa today to hold a dialogue with senior citizens and supporters. Tomorrow, he's campaigning in Isabela, which is part of the Solid North claimed by Bongbong Marcos as his bailiwick. The Commission on Elections puts to the test the automated system that will run the May polls. The poll body is avoiding a repeat of the controversial 7-hour glitch in 2019. Melissa Lopez walks us through the process.
A clean run for COMELEC's automated election system 48 days before the Filipino votes. It's a full setup before poll watchdogs, representatives of political parties and media, from filling out test ballots, feeding to vote counting machines or VCMs, transmission and canvassing, or the final counting of votes. 4 machines were deployed on Tuesday, meant for select towns in Cagayan and Iloilo. First, an electoral board member starts the VCM and prints an initial report. It should read 0 votes, meaning there is no preloaded tally in the machine. We were among those tapped as test voters. Using COMELEC's official marking pen, we were tasked to fill out the 30-inch ballot. Voters are reminded not to make unnecessary marks or crumpling the paper, as it could lead to spoiled votes. After accomplishing both sides of the ballot, a voter must then feed it to the vote counting machine. After feeding your ballot, a receipt will come out summarizing who you voted for. Upon checking, the receipt matched the names we shaded earlier. A voter won't be allowed to bring home this receipt and must be surrendered before leaving the precinct. The machine allows undervotes but will not count overvotes. For example, 2 shaded circles for president. Election returns were printed and transmission was swift using LAN cables. And shortly after, the tandem of Angelina Jolie and Stephen Curry won as president and vice president. Poll Commissioner George Garcia admits the dry run went well under ideal conditions, but may not be as smooth on the ground on May 9. He adds there won't be a repeat of the 7-hour glitch in 2019, which left the media server idle after polls closed.
Ngayon, masosolve na yon dahil may biglang papasok na isa pang server mula sa transparency at yung server na yan ang magtatanggap ngayon ng pabulto-bulto na result na magbabato ngayon sa media para hindi nabubulunan.
Commissioner Marlon Casquejo is confident of a quick nationwide canvassing.
So we're expecting for the national 7 days, hopefully, makapag-proclaim na tayo ng mga winning senator and party list.
COMELEC hopes such a demonstration will erase doubts about the integrity of the polls. Melissa Lopez, CNN Philippines.
How do presidential candidates plan to fight corruption? For one aspirant, those with corruption cases should not be allowed to run for office, while another hopeful wants to strengthen the judiciary system. Anjo Alimadio reports.
Walk the talk. That's the challenge of Vice President Leni Robredo for those promising to eradicate corruption. Robredo on Tuesday took her campaign to Nueva Ecija, where she lost to her rival Bongbong Marcos by 320,000 votes.
Pag sinabi pong ayaw sa korupsyon, hanapan natin ang resibo. E paano naman ayaw sa korupsyon kung hindi nga nagbabayad ng buwis?
Labor leader Leonie de Guzman vows to push for electoral reform to ban corrupt individuals from seeking elective posts. He says those facing corruption cases and are members of political dynasties shouldn't be allowed to run for office.
Ang problema talaga dyan ay yung ating electoral system na pinapayagan na kumandidato yung mga taong akusadong magnanakaw. Yung mga political dynasty na ang purpose lang naman kung bakit kumakandidato ay magpayaman. At isang paraan para yumaman, magnakaw.
Senator Manny Pacquiao wants to create more special courts that will hear cases of corruption. He says there's a need to strengthen the judiciary to ensure these cases don't drag on for years.
Ang judicial system natin dito ay talagang kulang sa budget, weak. Maraming nasusuhulan na kasi the more na tumagal yung kaso, the more na nagkakaroon ng ariglo. Kailangan talaga ma-expedite ang bawat trial ng kaso dahil para walang negosasyon na mangyayari.
Should he win the presidency, Mayor Isko Moreno says he will sell the massive art and jewelry collection seized from the Marcoses. Moreno made that statement as he pushed for the collection of the unpaid estate taxes of the Marcos family worth a whopping 203 billion pesos. Anjo Alimario, CNN Philippines.
Overseas, Filipino workers face many daunting challenges, from war and other conflicts to countless cases of abuse. How can the next administration help and protect OFWs? Stanley Gajete filed this special report.
Some 1.77 million Filipinos work abroad. 2020 government data show they left their loved ones to chase their dreams and to ensure financial stability for their families. Saudi Arabia is the leading destination of OFWs with 26.6% of the total deployment, followed by the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Hong Kong, Qatar, and Singapore. But each number is a human face that has a story to tell. Journalist Piers Morgan shared his testimony on the heroism of Filipino nurses in the United Kingdom for their dedication in helping COVID-19 patients.
Amazing number of Filipinos work in our NHS and unsung heroes, like so many, but just want to give them a shout out, helping everybody.
The Philippines is the biggest supplier of nurses worldwide, with over 150,000 Filipino nurses in the US and about 18,500 in the UK. But why do these brave souls choose to work outside country?
Primary reason why I leave Philippines is to earn bigger amount of money. Secondary reason na doon yung to gain more experience in a country wherein they have an advanced technology.
But when asked if he would still opt to work abroad if the same salary is offered here,
apart from the salary, binibase natin sa benefits na ibinibigay ng kumpanya dito.
Meanwhile, 15-year primary school teacher Levi Masli left Ukraine and returned to the Philippines last February because of the Russian invasion. But she's now afraid of her future here in the country where there are limited opportunities.
Kala nung iba, porke OFW ka, pag uwi mo, parang dami-dami mong pera, alam mo yon, yung parang hindi nauubos. Pero hindi ganun, hindi yun ang reality ng OFW.
Philippine authorities have recorded countless cases of abuse among Filipino domestic helpers. Recently, Migrante International and other groups commemorated the 27th death anniversary of Flor Contemplacion, who was executed in Singapore on March 17, 1995. According to Migrante, Contemplacion symbolizes government's decades-long neglect of Filipino migrant workers, most of whom are women.
Ngayon po, na ilang dekada na ang nakalipas nang namatay siya, marami pa po tayong mga migranting manggagawa, lalo na mga kababaihan nating migrante na namamatay, naaabuso at pinagsasamantalaan sa labas ng bansa.
The recent creation of the Department of Migrant Workers is dubbed as one of the legacies of the Duterte administration. Can it finally resolve the perennial our overseas workers? Only time will tell. Stanley Gahete, CNN Philippines.
Things may be looking up for motorists as oil companies slash pump prices after 11 straight weeks of hikes. And for the rest of the public who may finally see the end of the COVID-19 health emergency this year. Details next, only here on Newsnight. Welcome back. A sigh of relief for motorists and public utility drivers as oil firms decrease prices at the pump for the first time in almost 3 months. Chrissy Di Matulak reports some of them still want the easy way out to get the promised subsidy from the government.
Gasoline stations in Metro Manila are packed on Tuesday as motorists experience some relief over a slash in pump prices. Motorists say they now have something to look forward to after 11 straight weeks of fuel price increases.
Maraming salamat, bumaba ang gasolina kasi kaming nahihirapan.
Ay nako, napakaganda, napakalaking tulong para sa ating mga mahihirap, sa ating mga mamayan. Kaya dapat mas ibaba pa nila ng konti pa.
Starting 6 a.m. Tuesday, prices of gasoline decreased by 5.45 pesos per liter, diesel by 11.45 pesos per liter, and kerosene by 8.55 pesos. The adjusted price of diesel this week is 62 pesos from almost 71 pesos last week. Unleaded is currently priced at 65 pesos and 30 centavos from 71 pesos and 75 centavos, and premium gasoline at 66 pesos and 30 centavos from 72 pesos and 75 centavos. The adjustment in prices is good news for public transport drivers who have been contemplating halting operations if increase in pump prices persists. The distribution of fuel subsidy is on its second week, but some drivers claim they have yet to receive the aid, as they call on the government to make the process easier for them.
Madaming requirements, hindi namin maano yung requirements eh. Hindi namin ma-provide yung requirements sa dami. Kung ano lang sana, kung rehistro.
Mayroon po yung boss namin, yung operator namin. Pero hindi pa po namin alam, baka hindi pa sila nakakuha.
At a House committee hearing this week, the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board says it is coordinating with other agencies for easier distribution, especially for drivers.
We have to find a way na yung concern ng lahat ng mga transport group dito at hindi lang sa Metro Manila at buong bansa na aabot yung subsidiya doon sa bibili ng krudo.
The rollback comes a week after oil companies implemented their heftiest price hikes yet, amid Russia's attack on Ukraine. But the rollback does not offset the previous 11 price hikes. The Energy Department's data show that as of March 15, there has been a net increase of more than 20 pesos per liter for gasoline, more than 30 pesos for diesel, and nearly 25 pesos for kerosene in 2022. Chrissy De Matulak, CNN Philippines.
Malacanang says the Finance Department is studying the source of funding for the additional 300 peso cash aid that the President wants to give poor families to ease the impact of fuel price increases. The President said the previously approved 200 peso monthly allowance is not enough. The Social Welfare Department says it's also coordinating with finance officials.
Sa kasalukuyan, tayo po ay nakikipag-ugnayan sa Department of Finance hinggil dito. At habang inaantay nga po natin ang opisyal na kasulatan, pinaghahandaan na rin po ng DSWD yung ating internal guidelines hinggil sa financial assistance upang matiyak po na magiging maayos at mabilis yung ating pamamahagi ng tulong.
For now, it is still unclear as to when the government can release the 500 peso cash aid. Presidential candidate Senator Ping Lacson welcomes the development, saying the initial 200 pesos is, quote, pathetically too little. Lacson suggests tapping unused funds in the national budget for the program. Retailers have jacked up the prices of some vegetables. Our senior correspondent Lois Calderon made the rounds of public markets.
Higher input costs, fertilizers and transport, combined with more frequent rainfall, are driving up food costs. Vegetable retailers have raised the selling price of tomatoes and calamansi. In Quezon City, tomatoes in public markets of Tandangsora and Q-Mart in Cubao sell for 100 to 130 pesos per kilogram, more than twice the 60 pesos a week ago. Calamansi tripled to 120 pesos per kilogram. Both are higher than the prices the Agriculture Department published Tuesday.
Walang nagtanim, lugi ang mga farmers. Ang taas ng mga kasi, patubig, lahat-lahat, yung mga abono.
But other vegetables cost less: eggplant, onion, and imported garlic. Other food prices are stable, including the staple, rice. Rice retailers get their supply from the country's rice basket, Nueva Ecija, Cagayan, and Isabela. They say farmers there have not yet raised the price of grain. But since they have to replenish inventories that are good for the next 2 weeks, the price could change to reflect recent big-time fuel price hikes.
Nagsabi na sa amin yung mga supplier sa amin sa Isabela at saka Nueva Ecija na may posibilidad na tumaas nga yung week. Hindi pa siya ganun kataas ang gasolina natin noon. Ngayon mataas na may karapatan na silang tumaas.
Sa ngayon, ma'am, alam po, mababa pa po yung bigas, di pa naman tumaas po. Pero hindi ko alam.
Still, consumers are feeling the pinch.
Lahat mahal. That cannot be denied. Mahal talaga. Pero you have to fit in with your budget.
Kagaya kahapon, namalengke ako. Nakamagkano ako ngayon, mamamalengke ka na naman. Kulang.
Prices are dictated by supply and demand, but the heavyweight in that equation, oil. There may be a price rollback, but retailers still have to haggle with suppliers. That negotiation could be tricky, given that oil is volatile. Lois Calderon, CNN, Philippines.
The 20 February 2022 Senate Committee on Finance and Regulatory Affairs is set to hear the bill to replace the 500 peso cash aid. The bill, which was initially approved 200 peso monthly allowance, is now expected to be considered for 300 peso monthly allowance. Damage seen across parts of Ukraine, including Irpin, a city northwest of the capital, Kyiv. New satellite images show fires from military strikes in the area and flooding in the Irpin River. The river is critical to the Russian advance on Kyiv as it will help troops take the capital from the west. In the United States, President Joe Biden warning of potential cyber attacks from Russia. He says Russian President Vladimir Putin could employ more severe tactics against Ukraine. Meanwhile, nearly 400 Filipinos have already been evacuated from Ukraine. Now, back here at home, from a revolutionary force during Spanish rule to leading combat operations in conflict-torn areas in the south, the Philippine Army has always been the nation's first line of defense. David Santos will join us live from Taguig City. He tells us how the country's oldest and largest military service marks 125 years of heroism and history today.
From the establishment of the Philippine Revolutionary Army during the Spanish occupation, to the long-drawn war against insurgency and extremism in Mindanao, this museum in Fort Bonifacio highlights the stories of soldiers willing to sacrifice their lives for the country. As it marks its quacentennial this year, the Army in retrospective over the crisis in Europe.
Because if you look at Ukraine, ang mga lumalaban doon ay yung mga mamamayan nila. Their citizens, ordinary citizens, are fighting for their country. This is what we want to develop.
There have been calls to revive citizens training for national defense or even mandate military service. The Defense Department has previously nixed the idea, describing it as a logistical nightmare.
We will have to start slowly. No? We already have an existing reserve force. Yun muna yung palakasin natin.
The Army, like the Navy and the Air Force, is also struggling to build its strength. Among its latest acquisition, artillery assets to improve its firepower mobility. This amid persistent security threats, including potential foreign aggression. In a recent gathering of former Army chiefs, National Security Advisor Hermogenes Esperon stood by the government report of China's illegal incursion in the Sulu Sea in late January. Some reports say China could have been spying on Filipino and American troops training in Palawan. There's now a call in Congress to investigate the incident.
That's why we lodged a diplomatic protest. So we're not taking that lightly.
Now, the Army handed out anniversary packages to its units nationwide consisting of new uniforms, firearms, and vehicles. It is also releasing a one-time anniversary bonus of 3,000 pesos to more than 100,000 personnel. Pia.
Well, David, you're joining us there from the Army's headquarters in Fort Bonifacio. Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, Defense Secretary, speaking during this afternoon's Army Day celebration. His last as Defense Chief, what did he say?
Well, Secretary Lorenzana thanking the Army for what he called their rock-solid support throughout his term in the Defense Department. He cited the Army for having been in the forefront of many security challenges, including the government's response to disasters and the pandemic. Lorenzana, in his speech, also reiterated that the military won't be able to fully comply with the wish of their Commander-in-Chief, President Rodrigo Duterte, to put an end to the close to 5-decade-old insurgency problem. He said it will take a little bit more time to solve it. Now, just to add, Pia, this is the first time since the pandemic that the military held a major in-person event, complete with traditional honors and parade of colors, bringing back some semblance of normalcy in the organization. Pia.
David Santos there reporting. The COVID-19 public health emergency status could end this year. That assurance coming from the World Health Organization, which declared a public health emergency of international concern on January 30th, 2020.
The pandemic will take some time to end, but the emergency of COVID-19 could end this year. And what we mean by that is really taking the death and devastation out of COVID. And we can do that now with vaccines, with early diagnosis, with better clinical care. There will be conditions that will be met where the emergency is over, and that is being discussed through our emergency committee under the international health regulations.
The WHO saying the virus is well on its way to becoming an endemic, but could not say when.
But I think what we want people to hear when they hear us speak is a sense of hope and a sense of that this will end. That is something we can say for sure. The problem is we can't say exactly when. But this pandemic will end with our actions. And so what we want to see is everybody really working hard, living their lives, but being careful so that we can get closer to the end of this emergency as well as ending the pandemic.
Well, some good news back here at home for commuters. The MRT offering free rides for 1 whole month. That begins next week, Monday, March 28, until April 30. President Duterte made the announcement as the government marked the completion of the MRT rehab project this afternoon. We're showing you clips of the president himself taking the train from the Shaw Boulevard station in Mandaluyong City. The 18 billion peso MRT rehab project was launched in 2019. More stories to come. An achievement in planetary science. NASA has already discovered more than 5,000 planets outside our solar system. Find out more after the break.
Of the 4 army men who died in that controversial
Welcome back. In sports, Neil Etheridge is making his much-anticipated return to the Philippine ASCALs tomorrow. The Birmingham City player missed stints in the joint FIFA World Cup and Asian Cup qualifiers. But now Etheridge says he's ready to take on a leadership role for the team as they see action in the FAS Tri-Nation Series in Singapore. The ASCALs will face Malaysia tomorrow and Singapore on the 29th. On the volleyball court, only one team in the Pool A of the PVL Open Conference remains undefeated. The Signal HD Spikers triumphed over the Choco Mucho Flying Titans 3-1 at the Paco Arena. The news now about worlds beyond our own. NASA has found more than 5,000 planets outside our solar system. The milestone was achieved after the U.S. Space Administration added 65 exoplanets to its archive yesterday. Only 4% of all those confirmed are terrestrial or rocky planets like Earth or Mars. And that is it for now. Join me again on Politics as usual, now from 8 to 9 p.m. I'm Pia Hontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond headlines.
This program is brought to you by
More than 176 people want to join the senatorial race. There are 12 seats up for grabs. Among the aspirants is an advisor to the Health Department and the president of the iBank Foundation. Let's now get to know Dr. Mingita Padilla. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Ruth, and good evening to everyone who's watching tonight.
Maybe the first question I would like to ask you, Dr. Padilla, why do you want to move from the medical field to politics?
Actually, Ruth, it was a leap of faith, but what I had to do and hope that somebody would catch me because the call was coming little by little, getting louder and louder But the last straw was the pandemic and the response of the government, which we really felt was there was no sense of urgency, and there were so many things which could have been done better. Then the final straw was all the corruption that we saw. The Pharmaly, the PSDBM, the 42 billion transfer to the DOH, whereas so many of our colleagues were crying for PPEs, using garbage bags for PPEs. So many were dying, and there seemed to be so much unadulterated, obscene profiteering amidst all the suffering. So when you're faced with that, and then my colleagues were begging me, we need a doctor in the Senate, somebody who knows what it's like to practice, somebody who's also served the country in my own way as in the private sector, who has worked with government as an advocate, and sometimes frustrated advocate at that. I think everything, snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. And afterwards, I kept asking for signs from God, and I got it. And the call was so strong. And despite the fear and the sadness in a way, because I have to leave my patients, I cannot continue as it was. The call is stronger than the fear. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because if I don't do it, I'll regret it the rest of my life. So we have to try.
Dr. Padilla, you already mentioned yung ibang nakita nyo na sort of how the government allegedly mismanaged the COVID-19 crisis. But how would you have handled it? Like balancing lives and livelihood, like the implementation of the lockdowns, and also yung benefits for our medical frontliners?
Well, I think I've always maintained in all my interviews that there was a lack of sense of urgency, that instead of locking down right away or closing borders right away, they were still thinking of hurting the feelings of China. Vaccines could have been more made available earlier, because we heard complaints even from some diplomats that the Philippines didn't seem serious because there were so many innuendos but no serious deals, no serious. They kept flirting but they were not serious, something like that. I mean, it was like there was no sense of urgency, and it seemed that they were thinking about deals more than public welfare. And I know for a fact there was a tug of war all the time between those wanting to do their job earnestly and those thinking of profits. And this tug of war delayed so many things. Now, the granular lockdowns would have been better than the draconian lockdowns, except that we didn't have the capacity because our infrastructure, our health infrastructure, would not have been able to take it. So the initial draconian lockdown was, I think, necessary. But after that, we should have gone into granular lockdown if we had just tested more often, mass testing, better contact tracing. So much could have been done better. But this is all hindsight, okay? And now we have our vaccines, although we should ramp it up. And definitely the healthcare providers, the health workers, they are taken for granted. They have been taken for granted so long, and they're asking for so little: food allowance, transportation allowance, hazard pay. And then, I was at a rally this morning at the Senate, and I could really feel their pain when they were talking about, you don't want to give us, you only gave 20% of us those benefits, and we see all this money allegedly or apparently going into the pockets of so many people, and yet you cannot give us what's due us. And you're now angry at us when some of us go abroad for greener pasture, and you say we have no malasakit, we have no compassion for our country. But what did you do to us? It was a nurse was in tears saying these things, and this is how we feel. We doctors are hurt. We are hurt, and that's why this is also the source of the statement of indignation, which over 600 of us have already signed, which is very rare. Indignation and call to action. We cannot go on this way, not just for us, but for the future. This sort of corruption, which I think is we consider heinous, because it really cost deaths. It robbed us of life. It robbed us of a chance to recover faster from this pandemic. It cannot go on, and we cannot condone it, and we cannot turn our backs to it. It must change.
So, Dr. Padilla, how do you plan to combat what you're calling heinous corruption?
Well, as a senator or now?
Yeah, well, as a senator also.
Yeah, well, now we want accountability. We want the Senate to come up with the correct report. We want people to be charged. We want everything to be coming to the conclusion. We will not allow cover-ups, and we will call attention to it if we feel our intelligence is being insulted by the cover-ups, because sometimes it's so blatant that even you don't have to be a genius or educated to see that there's a cover-up. Even the most ordinary person in the street will say, ano ba naman yan? Napaka-obvious naman yan. Masyado naman tayong niloloko, no? Ginagawang tanga. They even say that, no? So we will have to be vigilant, and we will call out. We doctors who are usually so quiet, we're just so involved with our patients, we will call out what we see. And if it's not correct, then we will do something about it. And I think some of us will actually also file charges in court. So we're not going to wait for the Senate to do so, but I hope they do so. But some private citizens will also file charges in court.
In your previous interviews, and you're also the co-convener of Doctors for Truth and Public Welfare, you have given a lot of importance on the fight against misinformation, especially in terms of sa healthcare, no? Just how important is that, and what do you plan to do about it?
Well, if given the chance to be a senator, one of my priorities will be also to see how we can combat medical misinformation. Never mind the misinformation is just, nakakatawa, like this guy was kidnapped by a marshal or something like that. But if it's medical information, especially the kind that scares people, that prevents people, from getting vaccinated, which we know unequivocally saves lives. Vaccines save lives. All the statistics in the world have shown that. For every 10% increase in your vaccination, your hospitalization goes down by 40+% for every 10%. So can you imagine if you're stopping that because of medical misinformation? We ought to have a law. And we also need to educate our students. Maybe have, this is in connection with that, digital knowledge. How do you tell fake news from truth? And how do you also prevent predators from attacking or endangering our youth? This is all related, okay? May I say something also about moving on, how we can recover from COVID, from these lockdowns, how our economy can recover? Ruth?
Yes, go ahead.
May I say something about that? Because, I think almost all scientists around the world have now agreed that we're going away from the zero COVID to living with COVID. Because if we want zero COVID before we become normal or have some normalcy, we will not recover. We are one of the worst performing countries in the world. And according to Secretary Carl Chua himself, it will take us about 10 years to really recover. But we can hasten this, okay? One is we have to learn how to live with COVID. And the only way to do that is to ramp up vaccinations and to test frequently. We cannot just limit ourselves to PCR. And I'm glad to see that in many areas, in many offices, in many government agencies, they're using the antigen test because this is the one that's very practical. So we can go about our daily lives more freely. But as far as vaccinations are concerned, we have to now look outside NCR because this is the problem. We have to vaccinate before the surges come. Let's not wait for the surges. Because many of these places, once they have a surge, you'll have more deaths because they don't have the health infrastructure to deal with the surges.
Okay, Dr. Padilla, Also, outside of the medical field, we also want to hear about your economic agenda, maybe in terms of fighting poverty alleviation or, ensuring more job security, maybe?
Yeah, well, of course, you know that the health will always be related to jobs, okay? Because if you have, like what we saw, the pandemic, the whole world stopped. We lost jobs, etc. But I'd like also to focus on, can I also focus on the neglected parts, or neglected sectors of society, which are the farmers and the fisher folk? Because they are in dire straits, and our country is in danger of losing our farmers if we do not pay attention to them. I have been holding dialogues with them, and although there were laws supposedly to empower them and to make their situation better, they have not been implemented. So I will try to look into the benefits for the fisher folk and the farmers. Okay, and this is. Imagine we're an agricultural country. We cannot possibly be dependent on imports because one day the weapons of war will be food. And if we don't have our own food production, we will be very vulnerable to other countries. Imagine that, because we never took the time to develop our agriculture and we neglected our farmers. So food security is one way and of helping our economy, helping the least of our people. Now, as far as the jobs now, I think we have to continue where we're going now, which is opening up the economy slowly, making sure that we have some semblance of normalcy, while also ensuring that we have agile or flexible mechanisms to keep the cases at a manageable level. We should stop thinking of cases na per se. We should already base our decisions and base our opinion of whether we're doing okay or not on hospitalizations, because COVID, once we have been vaccinated, and then we have to ramp up the production of tablets like molnupiravir, which we like to be an antibiotic, then our lives can go back to normal. And as soon as we have that confidence, our economy will grow and we'll have jobs again.
Okay, we will continue this up-close conversation with Dr. Mingita Padilla after a quick break. Stay tuned to CNN Philippines.
Regent Mochi, your locally produced glutinous rice cake, comes in mango, green tea, ube, and assorted flavored packs. Regent Mochi Japanese-style glutinous rice cake by Regent.
Gumagaan ang inuman pag sandiglay.
Hoy, musta? Ako, stressed sa work, kaya ini-imagine kong nasa beach ako. Ako, busy sa paglaba at pagluto, kaya ini-imagine ko, nag-i-eat all you can tayo.
Ako, ini-imagine ko yung bar dati. Laging masaya. Kasi miss ko na kayo. Buti na lang, may San Miguel dito sa tindahan.
Pagtapos ng mabigat na araw, mag-inuman with friends and San Miguel. 100 calories lang, magaan sa tiyan.
Ulitin natin to.
Ang alin? Mag-imagine?
Hindi, mag-inuman.
This is the final word on CNN Philippines. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ruth Cabal. We continue our up-close conversation with senatorial aspirant Dr. Mingita Padilla. Doctor, I just want to know what you plan to do with the war on drugs. How do you plan to handle that?
Okay. But before I go on the war on drugs, can I just say a few more words about poverty? Just a few more words.
Go ahead.
Because I forgot to mention that come next year, the new budget, the Mandanas ruling of the Supreme Court will come into effect, meaning LGUs will be getting more funds, not 27.6% more than they are today. And we need to make sure that these funds are able to improve the economy in the LGUs, especially in the very poor communities, okay? So that needs a very close monitoring by the DILG and the various other line agencies. Make sure that they have deliverables. It should be results-oriented. So you have the money, but we must see results, and that needs oversight. And as a senator, we will make sure we have oversight, whether it's health, it's agriculture, and other devolved functions of government. So it's full devolution, okay? Now, the war on drugs, you know, I used to be the president of the Drug Abuse Research Foundation, or DARE, okay? So we had a very, very successful drug rehabilitation program. But you must remember, the drug addicts need a lifetime of healing. You cannot just say, okay, tapos ka na sa rehab mo, you're okay. No, you need a lifetime of healing. And the best support comes from the community. So it has to be a community-based response. We must go after the big fish. We must go after the pushers. We must go after the drug lords. But please, do not go after the users, no, per se, or the small time. You have to heal them. You have to heal them. I know that there's a lot of criminality behind drugs. I know that. But I also know that so many of these addicts can have a better life if they have the right guidance. So we had a very nice system in there. And a lot of the church groups and the community groups can do that also. So let's think of it as a disease, okay? But a lifelong disease. In other words, it's just like being an alcoholic. You have Alcoholics Anonymous. Recovering drug addicts need a lifetime to heal, and they need the support of the community. They should not be discriminated upon. They should be supported. This we can do, actually. through programs in the community. And
Okay.
we can make that one of our projects as well.
Dr. Padilla, for the last part of our interview, we have questions, a series of questions that you should just answer with yes or no. No explanation needed, okay? First question, do you favor easier public access to the SALN of the President, Vice President, and members of Congress?
Definitely yes.
Do you support
Yes.
lifting foreign ownership limits in the Constitution? Yes or no?
Some of it, yes.
Yes.
Some.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you favor the reimposition of death penalty for drug-related crimes?
Now, I would have to say no.
Mm-hmm. Should a sitting president be allowed to run for vice president in the next election?
No.
Do you favor resuming peace talks with communist rebels?
Yes, to a certain extent.
Should the country be more aggressive in protecting its maritime interests in the West Philippine Sea?
Definitely yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for joining the Final Word senatorial aspirant Dr. Mingita Padilla.
Followed by Med Talk Health Talk.
We'll talk about how to keep ourselves healthy during the pandemic.
Politics as usual.
In this country, not everything really goes according to plan, and politics is, as usual,
Up close and more. Catch CNN Philippines Hour on DZKI-IRIGA. Weekdays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Sa pagpili ng liderato, laging tatandaan, dapat nasa kanya lahat ng katangian na makapilipinas. Taong may respeto sa buhay at pamilya, makabuluhan at matinoong pamumuhay. Siya yung makapagtataguyod ng kabutihang panlahat, di mangiiwan, makakasama ang lahat. Malinaw ang pananaw sa makabagong bukas, makatwiran at patas pakisama, at higit sa lahat, makadiyos siya dapat. Sa pagpili ng liderato, laging tatandaan, dapat nasa kanya lahat ng katangian, Pilipinas, Pilipinas.
Gabayan ng Pilipinong bumoto ng responsable. Yan naman ang aming
Panatang Maka-Pilipinas.
Iboboto ko Maka-Pilipinas.
Makabayan sa lupang sinilangan.
Makataot may respeto sa buhay at pamilya.
Siya ay makatwiran at patas makisama.
Masigasig tumulong makaahon ang bawat isa.
Makatarungan, makalingat, maalalahanin sa kapwa.
Makakasama ang lahat, siya'y di mangiiwan. Siya ay makapagtataguyod ng kabutihang panlahat.
Siya ay makabatas.
Siya ay makatotoo.
Siya ay may malinaw na pananaw para sa makabagong bukas.
Higit sa lahat, siya ay makadiyos. Kaya't ayaw niya ng karahasan. Siya ay makakapayapaan.
Iboboto ko ang isang tao na makakalayaan.
Isang leader na makakalikasan.
Isang Pilipinong makabuluhan at matino ang pamumuhay.
Sa isip, sa salita, at sa gawa.
Gabayan ang Pilipinong bumoto ng responsable. Yan naman ang aming panata sa PPCRV.
CNN Philippines Hour sa RPN-DZKI-IRIGA alas 6 hasta las 7 ng manggi, Lunes hanggang Biyernes. CNN Philippines Hour.